Today we have a beautiful passage from the book of Wisdom. The book is also called the Wisdom of Solomon, but it was almost certainly not written by Solomon. In fact, scholars think that it's one of the last, probably the last books of the Old Testament to be written, and written somewhere between just 100 BC and even 40 AD in the time of Christ. So why call it the Wisdom of Solomon? Well, it's written in the tradition of Solomon's wisdom and his influence on the wisdom texts in the Bible like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And today we wouldn't assign our work, an author wouldn't assign his or her work to another author, but it was done in those days to lend authority to the work. And the reason why the author would want to lend authority, at least to this passage, is that earlier in the chapter, it's addressed to kings and rulers, and that's also mentioned later on in the chapter after this reading. But with that said, it also applies to us. You know, and if you think about it, we're all rulers of our own government, of ourselves. And I talked about this in the 29th Sunday 3 weeks ago, that we're using the English model. We're the prime ministers of our own government because we run the day-to-day operations of ourselves. I bet you didn't know you were that important. Well, if we're the prime minister, who's the king? Well, of course, we want the king to be Christ. But unless you're one of those very, very few people to whom Christ spoke directly, how do we know what he wants? Well, the answer is to seek wisdom. And in this book of wisdom, wisdom is presented as a lady. The word for wisdom in Hebrew and Greek is feminine. But let me tell you, Lady Wisdom is not shy. And we'll see, you can see that if we go back over some of the reading and see how eagerly God seeks us out through Lady Wisdom. We read, she is readily perceived by those who love her. She hastens to make herself known in anticipation of their desire. She makes her own rounds, seeking those worthy of her, and graciously appears to them in the ways, and meets them with all solicitude. Seeking, making her rounds, graciously appearing. See how eagerly God seeks us out? Doesn't it make you feel wanted by him? We'll see in a minute the ultimate value of wisdom, but it also gives us benefits, other benefits. And in this passage, it says that those who keep vigil for her sake, for wisdom's sake, shall quickly be free from care. Well, how does wisdom keep us from care? That's a good question. It doesn't mean that we'll be free from troubles or bad things happening in our lives. I propose that the way it keeps us from care is that we'll have that foundation to know that we can make good decisions. And also when bad things do happen, once we overcome the initial emotions of anger and grief or other strong emotions that are natural and normal to feel, we can begin to move beyond it and know that we're on the right path. Well, how do we find this wisdom? The best place is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It has the distilled wisdom of all the Old Testament and the New Testament and sacred tradition that I talked about last week. I'll put the address of the Catechism in the page for this YouTube. Now, living in God's wisdom doesn't just benefit in this life, it's essential for the next. And we see that in the gospel parable of the 10 virgins. Now, the parable probably takes some explanation. In Jesus' time, weddings took anywhere from a few days to a week. And after the agreement between the couple, the groom would escort the bride from her house to his house, and they were accompanied by bridesmaids, which are the 10 virgins in this story. At his house, in more modern language, they would enjoy their first bit of honeymoon. And after that time, then the bridesmaids would accompany them into the area where the wedding feast was held. So the 5 foolish virgins, were not ready to accompany them. Of course, Jesus is referring to the end of time, the wedding feast of the Lamb, where the church will enjoy unending happiness with him. And sadly, those who aren't ready, who didn't have the wisdom to follow his ways, sadly will be locked out. So remember, God's wisdom eagerly seeks us out. It helps us with the cares of this life, but it's essential to be ready for the next life, where, with St. Paul in the second reading to the Thessalonians, we shall always be with the Lord.